If you wouldn't mind in the Q&A section, maybe just type where you're from. It's always really interesting to see where people are at across the United States here. We've got about 60 people in here already. Numbers are climbing very steadily right now. And people rolling in with answers. Gainesville, New Orleans, Houston, shout out Texas, New Hampshire, Baltimore, Minnesota, Oregon, Mount Airy, North Carolina, beautiful. Florida, another New Hampshire, Clearwater, Idaho, Ventura. Holy crap. Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, well, we can go ahead and kick off. I'm super excited for this. As mentioned, we've got getting close to about 100 people in here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So we have some fun little slides to talk through. You should be able to see that now. So guys, help me keep an eye on this chat here, the Q&A as questions come up, but we can go ahead and kick off. So if you don't know who's talking right now, this is the time for introductions. So I'm Tucker, head of sales here at InsuredMine. Really excited to put on this webinar. It's a hot topic, and I've got two experts in the field. So super excited to welcome Anurag and Jason. Anurag and Jason, I would not be doing you guys a service by introducing you, so I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. And, hi, everyone. I'm Anurag Shah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Aureus Analytics. We are an AI platform for agents, and we'll dive more into it. And, super excited to be here today. It'll be fun.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, Tucker. This is an exciting topic. I don't think very many things get me more excited than AI. I've got a very technical background. I've been programming since I was 12 years old. So it's kind of the dawn of a new era, and I am super excited about the topic of today's webinar. So welcome, everybody. This will be fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Anurag. Thanks, Jason. If you don't know who InsuredMine is, I know there's a lot of people who aren't customers of InsuredMine. We are a sales, CRM, and marketing automation platform. That'll be really the only plug you get from me today, but wanted to make sure everybody knew where they were at. So, and I know these guys will dive in a little bit more on their platforms and their experience, but we'll kick off from here. So a little agenda, always like to set one. We've done our intros. We've got them done pretty quick. So we'll spend about the next 35, 40 minutes going into AI trends in insurance. At that point, we will open it up for Q&A. If you do want to pop questions in as they come up, feel free, and we'll try and get all those answered for you. So always interesting to look at where we've been as we look at where we are and where we are going. So one interesting part about AI is it's actually been around since the 1950s. Back in the late 1950s, they started measuring and verifying theorems that have been around for quite some time. You then saw the rise of chatbots through AI and automation. And then there was an interesting part where there was kind of a lull, the quiet decade, about 10 years where not much happened, and even a little bit longer for that. Jason, Anurag, why do you think that there was a lull in that technology during that time?
Well, it wasn't very practically applicable, nor was it anywhere close to the level of sophistication that we have now. It was kind of confined to labs, and they were doing a lot of work in IBM back then, but there really wasn't much in the world in the way of real world applications. So that quiet decade is kind of known as AI winter in a lot of circles, and it's been interesting to watch the ebb and flow, because if you look at kind of the technology adoption cycle, typically kind of takes off and then goes down and then heads back up. The S curve is known, and we're definitely on the upward trajectory now. But as you can tell, it's been a long journey to get here. And now, with ChatGPT kind of making it popular in the mainstream, it's an exciting time. But there weren't a whole lot of practical applications back then, in my opinion. I'd love to hear what Anurag has to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And probably one thing I would add is also the cost of compute. There's a big barrier to because a lot of these technologies, especially when we have to, process these large models, we have to process millions and now billions of variables. It's expensive to do it, and the cost of compute, the cost of memory. I remember being excited at my first computer and buying a 16 megabyte hard disk, right? So that's cost of compute was significantly higher. It was impossible to make anything practically possible. But today that's obviously come down significantly, which makes some of this possible. In addition to what Jason said, I think the cost was one big barrier to making it practically available at a larger scale. So it remained mostly in labs and projects and experiments.
Great point, guys. I think, yeah, getting it to the consumer at the end of the day during that time period was just not feasible. Then you had, Excel coming out, you had software starting to take a boom, you had just normal hardware that was coming to market. So all these things were adoptable technologies by consumers that came out first. So I can remember playing chess as a kid online. Roshan, our CEO, is here. His kid plays chess against AI all the time and usually wins. He's a pretty smart kid. Are some of the early adoptions of this AI in the late 90s. Again, still during this time, I can remember my dad coming to class and taking apart a computer in about 1997 in front of my class. And that was pretty cool that you had that access to that kind of technology and could do that yourself at home, but still AI was on the cusp. Now you're seeing later in the late 2010s, early 2010s, and during that time, we have names for these technologies. Siri, she probably barks at you on your phone when you don't mean to talk to her sometimes. Alexa, and these other ones coming together. And then where we're at now, I think ChatGPT is very interesting for multiple reasons. One, it's becoming kind of the name of AI, right? So a lot of times when you blow your nose, you use a Kleenex, you don't call it a tissue. When you drink a soda and you're from Texas, you might call it a Coke, whether it's a Sprite or a Dr. Pepper. It's now almost a branded name that we're using for AI, and you're seeing this AI revolution. Guys, what are your thoughts on the timeline, where we've come, ChatGPT? What are we missing here?
I think one of the things that, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit, but the advent of generative AI, in recent years has really been eye-opening for a lot of people, and it goes far beyond chat. In fact, one of the things that I think people are in the process of discovering, as they've trained, especially these large language models, these emergent behaviors are starting to come out. Things like being able to use tools, make decisions, and these were, nobody anticipated these. They kind of emerge as they're training these large language models. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting is, as they add more data to these models and they get larger and larger, these emergent behaviors, these new capabilities start to become obvious. And a lot of the new companies that you see in the space, a lot of the new startups, the investments are around these emergent behaviors, which really largely come from large language models, which have been around for a while, but they really started being trained at scale within the past decade. And so this is one of the biggest changes that I'm tracking, and I think a lot of folks in the space are what are these new emergent behaviors, these new capabilities that the AI models gain as you feed them more and more data, and how can they be harnessed, especially in an enterprise type of situation?
Most definitely. Yeah. Building on itself is one of the biggest powers of AI, and its continuous ability to learn. Anurag, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Jason said, and I would say even from a broad availability of data, right? So even when some of these models were getting built, there was not a lot of data available for them to process, and now we generate so much data every single day that there is a lot of data available, and these models really thrive when there is more data for them to learn from, right? So over the last few decades, we've generated more data than we know what to do with, right? So there's so much data out there that these models can now consume as inputs into their processing to be able to create something useful. So even if you had great models, but if you didn't have enough input data to train them on, it wasn't very useful. So I think that's the other thing that, and I think on a slightly lighter note, I think the name ChatGPT helps the branding as well. Calling it Chat, I think if it was called just GPT, it wouldn't have been that popular. And I think just because it became free and easy for people, Stable Fusion came, is around the same thing, but people, like you said, Tucker, I think the brand is now becoming, Chat GPT is like a default. You might be using different models. Actually, it doesn't have to be just GPT, right? So that's, I think that's helping put that in everyday conversation. Plus it became free. It was fun to use. It was easy to use. Kids are using it to do homework, at least mine are. So that's kind of putting it out in the public a lot more than what it was earlier, where it was only accessible to a few people who really knew how to use it. So today you don't need any special skills to use it, or at least touch it and feel it.
Right. Yeah. Important to note that AI will always need a human co-pilot in some way, shape, or form, as you mentioned there, but the ability for us as humans to use it and adopt it has become so much easier. And I think that's what's most important about this timeline, is we're putting it in people's hands. Again, in 2022, you can read fastest software program to 1 million users in 5 days. And now we have hundreds of millions of users using it.
Exactly.
That's pretty incredible as far as adoption of technology is concerned. Roshan, any thoughts from you on this timeline or where we've been so far with AI?
No, I think we are at a very interesting timeline right now. I think we always say, when we look at any trajectory, we say, how did that happen? And the two words that come up, it happens slowly and then suddenly. Which is that sudden moment is that inflection point for everything. You build it to a point and it is a very slow grind. And then, you hit that mass moment, and there is always, as Anurag mentioned, whether it's the name, whether it's free, there are factors that would play into it that will trigger that, why it becomes a mass movement. And what is interesting is not how far we have come, but what is interesting is what is coming up next. And I think that is intriguing everybody. I think everybody is holding on to their seat to watch this movie. So I think, everybody's like that kid in that candy store about AI. Everybody is excited, but just do not know what's going to happen.
I think that's right. And one other interesting aspect of this that's really come to light recently is the fact that these models are now capable of training themselves. There was a recent as in a few months ago, but it might as well be years in the AI world, but there was an open source model that Meta released, and there were some researchers that had ChatGPT create training data for this new model, and it actually ended up being just as good as ChatGPT. So these models are now, able to train themselves, which is creating kind of an exponential curve as you look at the capabilities of these technology and the ability to build new things with them. So we're on the cusp of this. I mean, it's still the first inning, and it's going to be very exciting to watch.
I think we are all optimistic because we are enthusiast technologists. But, I think it is equally important to talk about the darker side of this. And there is enough red herring, there is enough alarm being put out there. And I'm sure several of you may have even read the study by this Stanford professor. I think it came out a couple months ago. So this guy was, he had a very specific prompt that he was training ChatGPT and a couple other models to ask the real intent of that model itself. And one of the outcome of that was it wanted to come out of the model and become human. Like, how would you even fathom that? And once AI becomes a human or a quasi-human, it's an human with AI or a human without AI, you know who's gonna win.
Fascinating thoughts.
Absolutely.
And you want to look into the future. That's why we've got 3 CEOs on the call today. This is what they do for a living. So always important, again, to look back as we look forward. So really good to go through this timeline. So we've got a couple questions that we're going to be asking ourselves today as we look forward and we look at where we're sitting in the present with AI. We're going to talk about what is AI. I mean, you may have come into this conversation and say, I just know that it's 2 letters. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. We've teased it a little bit. We're all on the call to know why we should care, right? What does this mean for our business, for our agency, for our lifestyle? I think one of the big ones that Roshan brought up, what are the common misconceptions about AI? What are we thinking about that maybe we shouldn't be thinking about? Or, what are some of the dark sides of AI as well? Stanley Dean, I think, posted he wants to know, what are we doing with AI today? How can I use it? How can I apply this to my agency? I think all 3 of us or 4 of us on the call can give examples of how we're using it. Spoiler alert, I wrote the description for this webinar with AI and I changed about 3 words. It took me 30 seconds to write that and get that out, which is pretty cool in my opinion. So how will AI change my agency over time? And then again, should I be worried about AI? So these are the questions our panel came up with. If you have any other questions you'd like to see answered, please pop them into the chat and we'll go through them. So guys, I know everybody has their own definition of AI. When I search online, and I found this on Forbes, AI is typically defined as the ability of a machine to perform cognitive functions we associate with human minds, such as perceiving, reasoning, learning, and problem solving. But I think there's better definitions around AI. And I think Jason and Anurag even have different definitions that they like to talk about, which is interesting, as AI can be a little bit polarizing. So guys, maybe you can talk through more of your definition of AI.
Yeah, I'll go with this the first part of it. So I mean, at the core of it, it's a software program that takes an input and generates an output, right? I mean, don't get, while you can give whatever terms you want, but at the core, it is learning from some data and it's running taking some input and producing some output, right? And that doesn't change. Where it changes it is how much data can you really consume and what do you do with it, and what kind of models can use the data to train on in order to deploy it in different scenarios that were probably not existing in that training data set to begin with. And that's where it keeps getting smarter and smarter. And this is a definition that has been used for some time now. Like if you show a software program 1 million photographs of a cat and then give it one new picture and ask it to find out whether it's a cat or not, that's what we call as a narrow AI, where it is learning from 1 million pictures and then it's finding out ability to identify cats from any given picture, right? And I'm taking a very simple example. General AI is where it takes knowledge from one domain and goes to the second domain, which is I think where we are now with GPT and large language models, is where you can give it 1 million pictures for a cat and then say, can it use that model to find dogs in photographs, right? And again, I'm super simplifying it. It could be in healthcare, it could be in insurance, it could be in medicine, whatever, right? So it could apply. Can it go from one domain to other? Super AI, which I think is where the debate can be, is that are we there? And I think Jason just mentioned we are starting to learn from models where it becomes equal to or better than human thinking. I don't think we are there yet. Obviously, everybody has their own view on this, but I think there's a long way before we even get to super AI. We are just starting to scratch the surface of general AI, especially with GPT's kind of large language models, neural networks being deployed. I think we are getting much better at general AI. Super AI is a lot far off, and we'll talk a little bit about the whole thought of why we are scared of some of the things which we don't know about, or where some of the people may have heard about AI in different negative formats. But anyway, that's interesting. I'm a very optimist on AI. So I don't see. I mean, there are risks to any technology. I mean, I was just reading a very interesting article that there was a New York Times article, I believe, or something which said, typewriters are taking the romance out of love letters, right? So that's possible. I mean, every technology has its downside, so that AI does as well. But hopefully this gives a little more perspective on different types of it. And I think we are pretty much in the center of general AI phase right now, getting deeper and deeper into it. So hopefully that answer. Happy to answer any questions, but this is how I look at it.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. And, you can look at AI as the architecture of models such as neural networks, for example, but I think the most useful definition that I've heard is the ability for computers to reason and learn. And you could almost, whether or not they're actually thinking is up for debate, but you can't argue with the fact that many of these new models actually are capable of reasoning, and as demonstrated by the fact that they're able to, pass the bar exam, pass medical exams, and the ability for these models to do human-like tasks just continues to increase. I think one of the things that, again, recently has kind of taken the spotlight is generative AI, which we've got a little diagram up there on the upper right. And the real difference there is generative AI is not more kind of traditional AI methods involve a lot of labeled data and supervised learning. Generative AI is, again, it was kind of almost an accidental discovery. They realized, a large language model, for example, really all it's doing is predicting the next word in a sequence. And they realized, once you train it on enough data, and this is unlabeled data. I mean, for example, GPT-3, which was my first exposure to one of these models, they trained it on a large corpus from the internet. So things like Wikipedia and, YouTube and, all these human generated content. But they realized when you start when it starts generating these tokens one after another, it actually produces what appears to be, actual reasoning, and it does very well at that. In practice, we're not talking about one model. It may be an underlying model, but when we put these into use, it'll be a model, a bunch of models kind of strung together in sequences to do things, complex tasks, and you'll have models that will, one model will create an output, the next model will evaluate that output and see if it needs to go, send it back and reevaluate, for example. So the architecture of this is quite interesting from a computer science perspective, but I think what is really interesting is how you can actually apply these today. And the packaging is not super sophisticated yet. I mean, obviously there's tons of companies starting up all the time to try to package these in a way that they're easy to consume. But in practice, I think the real ability to harness these is going to be coming within the next 6 to 12 months. If you're putting these into practice right now, you've got some pioneers here on this call, companies that have kind of embraced AI in their products, but they're really kind of the early movers, early adopters. And so even a lot of the things that we do at our company, internal things like using AI for support, there's not great infrastructure around that yet. So it's harder to see unless you're actually on the receiving end of the output. Which a perfect example here, case in point, is this the presentation. Tucker, you mentioned that you created, for example, the description and some of the content with AI, and so it's really neat to see some of the output. And it's not all chat, by the way. I think that's an important point to make about these models. Chat is just a very easy way to interface with these models, but it's just one. And if you look at what people are doing with software behind the scenes, there often is a chat interface on top of it, but these are often hidden behind the scenes. That's some of what we do, for example, and I think we'll talk about some of the use cases, but it's not all chat. It's not all writing poems and songs and things. It's like real world use cases here. So I'm a little bit more reserved when it comes to things like artificial general intelligence. People tend to get worried about that, and there are definitely risks that we can talk about. But I think the potential to 10x or 100x productivity in real existing enterprise use cases is very real, and a lot of companies are experiencing that today.
Great, guys. Yeah, I think taking it very simply, I like the dog and cat analogy, right? I like the conversation is one part of AI, but it's not all of AI. Very easy to understand, but what's important is what's going on behind the scenes. Just like humans can communicate, a kid starts talking at 1-2 years of age, and then down the line is able to work on algorithms, able to build models for things. That's the more advanced side of AI. You think about, how humans grow their intelligence. You can apply that to AI and where it's going. And one thing that has become apparent is this is ramping very, very quickly. With any technology, anything that really happens in life, there's an exponential curve, right? And that curve is ramping more and more quickly as time goes on, and we're starting to look straight up, but still a long way to go as well. So great stuff. So why should we care about this? What is the impact going to be? Jason actually found this on Google Trends. So if you go to Google Trends, you can type in any word. You can type in pickleball, and you can see that has been searched an unbelievable amount of times in the last 12 to 18 months, but so has AI. So one of the most important parts about AI is the interest for anything in our world to take flight. For it to get mass exposure, for it to get consumers using it, there has to be interest, and there has to be a reason to care. So, guys, maybe you can talk about why everybody on this call should care about AI.
Anurag, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'll actually extend to what Jason mentioned in the last slide, and a little bit in terms of the chat part of it. And I think the question is interesting why we should care, but I think we are already caring and we are already using it. So whether it's your YouTube recommendations or your Siri or your navigation and traffic and maps, I mean, we are using AI in things that we probably don't even realize we are using AI. So and that I think is proof of a fact that you should care, because you're already using it. It's already impacting lives. You may not realize it, and I think the best AI implementations are the ones where you don't realize there is one happening in the background from a user perspective. But essentially, it's already there. So I don't think not caring would help, simply because we are way past that point where we can decide whether we want to worry about it or not. We are already using it. I think it's just getting into the front and center of all the conversations now because of some of the things we just spoke about. So 100% we should not just care about it, but I think we should be interested, and it is going to create that 10x difference that Roshan just mentioned, like those who use it versus those who don't, right? And that's going to be the difference between organizations or people or products, right? So that's going to be a differentiator. So yeah, 100% you have to care, but I think quite frankly it's a redundant question in my mind that we are already well past that stage where we all need to care. We have to now think of how we use it and how do we benefit from it, rather than does it really matter? So in my view, we are already a little bit ahead of that question as in general as an industry.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. And it is still so early. Like it still kind of blows my mind every once in a while. I run into people who don't even know how to use Google effectively, and as you have conversations with folks in the broader world, the number of people who have actually used something like ChatGPT, which is by far the easiest way to get into AI and touch and feel it, is still very, very small. If you look at the general population. In fact, a lot of people still haven't even heard of it, which is a little mind-blowing. But I look at it as it is a fundamental shift. It feels like as big of a shift, and it's still early, so we haven't felt all of it, but as big of a shift as personal computers or the internet. I absolutely believe that. And I think what we're going to see is a similar dynamic as, you know, moving from horses and buggies to cars. You're going to see a lot of industries and businesses that were created to, you know, shoe horses and things that kind of fade into the background, and you're going to see new ones pop up. But I think it's very prudent on everybody to, you know, even if you're not using it on a day-to-day basis, at least pay attention to it, because it will 100% affect every single job. In fact, I was just looking the other day, mint.com came out with some stats. They said that in May, 80,000 jobs were laid off because of AI just in May. And I would anticipate that will continue, especially people who are not able to harness this tech. I think what you're going to see, and we're seeing, for example, programmers within our own company who are able to use AI are at least 10 times more productive. It takes a little bit of curiosity, and, you know, I'm out there, you know, pushing people. I'm actively pushing our entire company to use AI as much as possible because I'm a huge fan of it. But it does come with risks, and it is going to change a huge part of the economy. It already is. I mean, you can almost see it building over time, you know, in hiring, in jobs in particular. So some jobs are going to fade, just like you know, blacksmiths and you know, horse trainers, and others are going to thrive. And the people who are able to understand what AI can actually do in a practical sense are going to be in the pole position and really have a big advantage. So, you know, I think that's part of what we're here today to do, is to help people understand how they can actually use some of this technology in their business.
Most definitely. So I think you're seeing a perfect storm of mass adoption. You're seeing changes in the marketplace with a hard market and a changing market. Obviously, friction creates fire, right? And you're seeing companies that are leveraging it win. They're doing more with less. They're becoming more efficient, and they're doing things differently, which can create a strategic advantage. And if you look at different industries, I was just reading about how doctors are using this to communicate with their patients better, because, you know, maybe doctors are great at medicine, but they're not great communicators. If you hopped on early, you would have heard me talk about the Beatles, Paul McCartney using AI to write a new Beatles song, and they're going to use John Lennon's voice behind that. And even a chip manufacturer like NVIDIA is exploding right now. So it's being built into the very chips that are running the technologies and the things that are working around our house every day. So again, this mass adoption is driving things forward. So this is a really interesting part about AI, because again, it is so new as far as what we know about it, and there's a lot that we don't know about it. So some misconceptions that we threw up here. One we already talked about: AI is not new technology. It is definitely one that's rapidly growing. AI is smarter than and can replace humans. You know, Jason did mention that there were some layoffs recently around this, but again, these are just maybe repetitive tasks. So I think a lot of what you'll see is that it's replacing very small tasks, 5-10 minute tasks, where humans can be better used to do other types of activities. So it may just change the way the workforce is stacked on top of one another. And guys, maybe you want to talk about a couple of these other bullets.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first on that. And I would say conceptually, if you look at it, I don't think technology, not just AI, but it's not necessarily saying it's going to replace humans. What it essentially does is it kind of automates or makes it more efficient in certain parts of the workflows that we operate in, and allows us to use our human power for other things. In the short term, it might look like it's replacing people or it's a job loss. But if you look at it from a net perspective, it's going to create more opportunities than it has. I mean, if you look at it from a very simplistic perspective, the world has more jobs today than it had before there were computers, right? I mean, so if you look at it, there is net addition of, things that we can do. Yes, I mean, skills required to do that will evolve. Some jobs, telephone operators, horse trainers, like Jason said, I mean, some jobs will go and some jobs will be replaced with newer ones. But as far as there is net evolution, I mean, that's how the human race evolves, I guess. So I don't see that as a replacement or fear of losing, specifically replacing humans. Yes, it is replacing some tasks, and that's always been the case. So it's not unique to AI. It's probably more visible today. A few years later, we won't talk of it as we don't talk of telephone operators today. So I guess that's my view. I don't think at least I'm not worried that it's going to create any replacement of humans. It's not new. We discussed, and it is not unbiased. I mean, it has its biases because it's based on data that is given for training. So based on the data, actually, there's a pretty interesting Netflix series which talks of how some of the models based on bias create outputs that might lead to actions and which might be unfair to certain segments of people, whether it's from a credit perspective, whether it's from health perspective. So there are unique ways to look at it. So it is eventually like I said, it's a software program which has been trained in a certain way. So the way you train it is going to be the way you, again, if you only show one breed of cats photographs, for the model to learn, it is only going to learn from that, right? So that is going to be impacted in that model. So there is going to be certain level of bias, certain level of segmentation in that output that any AI model generates. So I think we have to deal with it and make sure the models are built better and better rather than not use them, right? And I think the biggest point in my view here is that AI is going to allow smaller organizations to compete with the bigger ones. Or it's almost creating a level playing field. Things that only big companies could do. You need 100 data scientists, you need a big infrastructure. You don't need that anymore. You can use some of these technologies, doesn't matter how big or small you are. So you're kind of creating a level playing field, and suddenly you have a great advantage. You are not worried about fighting the big organization. So that's really the strength I believe that you can leverage. And that's a big opportunity for everybody who's early into adopting something like this. So I see that as a big opportunity for all of the small, medium-sized businesses to be able to leverage on this and take a strong position. So yeah, I would say those are some of my views. I'll hand it to Jason to see what he thinks about it.
Yeah, well said. I think it's already kind of disrupting the startup industry. For example, because you don't need a team of 20 people, speaking from a software perspective, not an agency perspective, although it's probably, applicable, but you need a much smaller team to achieve the same amount of output that you did before, which is really groundbreaking. And the one thing I will add to this is, there's a lot of talk in the news about, AI becoming sentient, and Russian even talked about that example. And one of the things that I don't think people really realize about these models is they're very easy to control and nudge in a certain direction. Meaning, if you ask a leading question like, "Do you want to escape from the machine?" it will take that and start running in that direction and say, "Yes, I want out of," But it really it's because you're asking leading questions. Whereas if you ask a question about, is this account a good underwriting risk? It's not going to talk about, let me out of the machine. It's going to talk about the underwriting risk. So I think there's and there's a lot of time and effort being spent on what people like to call alignment, which means making sure that it stays on the rails. It doesn't, introduce bias or, hallucinate. So that, it is still early, but the progress that's being made in these areas is incredibly rapid as well.
Most definitely. Emily just posted U.S. Senate will host its first members-only briefing on artificial intelligence this week. Saw that as well. It means, even our government is taking this pretty seriously. One thing to mention, so we talked a lot about democratizing this technology on this slide, meaning that, you know, people have access to it. ChatGPT is actually owned by OpenAI, which is a nonprofit organization, and the founders of that essentially wanted it to become mainstream for people to use. So again, this is something that should be available to all. And I think a lot of where the value is going to be coming from is not just the chat side, but the insight side, where artificial intelligence is providing us feedback. It's providing us opportunities to grow our business, to do better, and giving us suggestions around that, as opposed to we were always putting an input into a cell, into a field previously with software, and that's how we would get anything back from a software program. So really exciting to see that develop. So what we've all probably been waiting for is, what are we doing with it today? So if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to show you one quick thing. So this is our sales CRM. This is a pipeline manager. So if I was to come in and take a note in my sales CRM and add a note, this customer is not happy, I can then use AI to expand that. I can use it to rephrase it. I can use it to turn it into another language with a click of a button. So it's thinking. There we go. So this is now an expanded note and even an email that I could send. Well, one thing I'm doing as well, and a lot of our customers are doing, is writing emails with it. I need to authenticate my email, but if I wanted to write something like your renewal is coming up within 30 days, and I'm going to just rephrase this, it's then going to rewrite this for me. So just some really simple, maybe complex for some people, on what we're doing from a sales and marketing perspective. So allowing us to communicate better, to write marketing emails, to answer questions that we may not have the answer to is a really simple thing that we're doing today, and I'm leveraging a couple of times a week. Guys, you can take yours from here. I know you've got some examples that you use every day and your customers use every day.
Anurag, you want to go first?
All right. Yeah. So I think for those who are listening in and don't know, so we have a AI platform called Donna, which is basically a platform for agents and brokers to look at their data and predict their consumers' sentiment and consumers' next steps, recommend cross-sell opportunities, identify who's going to churn, who's not going to churn. So there has been AI models built into it. We just launched a ChatGPT integration of Donna. We call it Donna Knows, which is just last week. So you can basically converse with your data. So you can say, tell me how many customers I have. Tell me who are my happiest customers, right? Tell me where my best cross-selling opportunities are. So we've deployed AI in a way that is looking at the agency's data, learning from all of the different agencies that we are deployed on, and then helping agents to kind of make recommendations, understand consumer behavior, find opportunities to sell or retain, as the case might be. And now with ChatGPT and the OpenAI integration that we've done, we actually now extended this by saying, okay, we are not only looking at the data that exists in your agency, but you can also combine it with the OpenAI models and look at, hey, can I look at this specific customer in more detail, and something similar to what Tucker was just showing. Can I write something about that customer who's not happy, right? Or here are a list of customers who are not happy in a specific region. Can you write in a specific style that suits that region, right? So you could basically identify your own data, but also combine the power of AI and OpenAI with it. So that's what we are doing, which kind of covers some of the things that are on the slides: so customer experience, understanding data and insights. We don't do a lot on the underwriting side, at least right now, but it's more on the operations and the customer experience perspective. So that's something we are doing already. Like I said, the platform is called Donna, and it's called donnaforagents.com is the website. So that's how we have been deploying this over the last few years. So just on a slight funny side note, when we launched it, everybody told us, please don't use the words AI when you try to present it because you will scare people, and now everybody wants us to talk about the AI that we have in it. So it's a good change of change of pitch for us. So anyway, so over to you, Jason.
Sure. Well, I look at it in two different camps. One, we use it a ton internally for things like, we use Slack. So taking, Slack conversations and shifting those into a knowledge base that we can then, harness to answer customer questions. We have an insurance platform that, so we use it a lot just for our own internal scalability, but then we also have a product called Underwrite GPT that integrates with the platform, so you can take customer information and start to automate tasks. So we have what are called AI assist actions, and those span underwriting, sales, servicing, loss prevention. And what it allows you to do, and I think you'll see this, not even specific to our platform, but I think there's a lot of the use cases that you're going to see emerging here in the upcoming months and years. But things like, I'll talk about underwriting here real quickly. So doing things like large loss reviews, figuring out which information still needs to be collected, creating underwriting checklists, looking at appetite fits. But then for agencies, things like personalized sales letters that combine product collateral with what you know about the customer, with what the underlying model knows about their industry or where they live, and creating a personalized one-to-one sales letter that explains why this product is a good fit for them, for example. Things that normally would take a ton of time and effort, you can now do in seconds. And I think that's the real promise of this technology for me, is you can take activities that used to be prohibitively expensive for all but the biggest accounts, and you can start scaling those to every single account in your business. And over time, you're going to start, I believe that companies will have their own fine-tuned models. And we don't have time to get into this, but it's a key kind of focus of AI these days, where you take the output of an AI model and you use that to teach the model how to operate better in the future. And I believe this is going to be a core piece of IP for every business on earth. Some other things that we're doing, things like loss simulations. This idea actually came from an agency that we're working with, where they wanted to explain what an uncovered loss would look like to a customer if they don't have a specific coverage, let's say cyber or whatever the coverage is. They can actually create kind of a day in the life of what an uncovered loss would look like if they don't have a coverage. So this is a great sales tool. Things like loss prevention, which again, normally you need a producer. Maybe some bigger agencies have loss prevention departments, but you can now take, again, what you know about the customer and what the underlying model knows about their industry, or where they live specifically in personal lines, and you can start to create loss prevention checklists to prevent losses, which obviously increases the profitability of the account for the carrier and the agency. So there's a lot that can be done there to actually, and not to mention just the improvement in the customers' lives when they can do that. And then also things in servicing. So being able to have welcome letters that are, again, customized to the customer, even if they're a tiny customer. You can scale these expensive activities down to the smallest customers now. Follow up renewal letters, checklists, these different activities that, again, typically are very costly because you have to have a CSR do them, and they may not even turn out to be that great unless you have a really great set of CSRs. Now you can start to actually scale these up. And I think the results are going to be very interesting as this technology makes its way through the community. You're going to see a lot more. The agencies that are able to harness this tech are going to, to their customers, it's going to feel like a much more high touch experience. Their customers will have fewer losses. The agencies themselves are going to have much better results. And things like certificate checking, for example, generation policy checking. Some of these activities that are very time consuming become almost instantaneous as you start to deploy some of this tech. So just a few of the areas that we've seen as very promising.
Great thoughts again, guys. So the way we communicate with customers, the way we understand our customer data, their profile, if they're happy, not happy, insights around what we should do with certain accounts, if they're at risk, how we should manage them, again, how we should communicate with them based on all these topics are what we're going to start to see, and we're already seeing, especially with the three platforms that are represented on today's webinar. So quick time check. We've got about 9 minutes left, and we've got a couple questions. So do y'all see challenges with AI being used by insurance companies to dictate how long a person can be in the hospital or nursing facility when data does not replace personal interaction? So how, I guess, is it a challenge? Is it a concern around what AI can actually predict around insurance and that life cycle and loss ratios? What are your thoughts there, guys?
I see health as being one of the areas that will be regulated. There's a few areas where I think the use of AI will be regulated. Weapons systems and health being two obvious ones. So I think that's probably the domain of more traditional models. I think that there's a lot of promise in using some of the newer AI models to optimize health. But in that particular example, I would, that's probably more of the domain of, doctors and traditional medical systems, in my opinion, but I'd love to hear Anurag's thoughts on that.
No, I agree. I think in general, I think regulation is going to be hard on something like AI. Once the genie is out of the bottle, it's very hard to put it back in. But there will be some areas like health, like absolutely defense, which will 100% be regulated on what you can predict and what you should not predict, and what inputs can you use in order to be running some of the predictive models for that. So I think there'll be some areas which 100% will be and should be managed and regulated. But I think a broad regulation on AI is very hard to implement. And we see some people already asking for that. But I think that's a very hard, almost impossible to be able to do that in general. But specific industries, specific sections can definitely take that stand.
Yep, a couple more here. So from Scotty, how can we use AI to automate prospecting, generate leads? So I think the most simple way is for AI to understand who your best fit customer is. So it may say, all right, my best fit customer has this many lines of business, it's this type of insurance, it's this carrier, right? And then it would go look at some web-based application that would have a list of leads. And it's saying, I'm going to take that list of leads that matches my customer profile and then marry that with conversation out to them around, hey, this is the value prop we provide for people just like you. This is who we work out with already. And this is why it makes sense for you as a buyer, because we understand you. So marrying up the customer base, the people you serve, your value propositions with the people in the market that would resonate with, I think is the easy way to do that. And then the conversation happening with real-time insights, merging fields that you have on these folks to provide that communication in real time. So a combination of Alexander here and Kenny, any concerns with data privacy when integrating with ChatGPT? And in a deeper fashion, what should folks in the independent agency space keep in mind with what data rights they might give up when using these tools to evaluate their own information?
I think that's a great question, actually. Yeah, and I think we have to be very careful on what data you use and what you allow to be shared. For example, when we deployed or when we built this OpenAI integration with our platform, we decided that none of the agency data is being sent to OpenAI for its learning, right? Unless you really explicitly want your data to be used for a specific use case. Like Tucker just mentioned, in terms of finding opportunities and say, okay, I'm willing to send information about my ideal customers so that I can find other customers like that. How much information are you willing to share? I think those are things you have to be really cognizant about. But in general, I think we have to look at it in two ways. One is if you're using just the model you are not really sending data to it, and if you're only processing it for your needs. So for example, if you're writing emails, or if you're writing creating content for yourself, right, collaterals, I mean, you're fine. But if you're doing anything that's specific about a customer, you definitely have to be careful of what information you're sharing, not just to ChatGPT, but any AI. Whether does that remains within your organization, or does that go outside? Is it used for learning, or does it get used for beyond learning, right? So I think having that clarity is absolutely important. So you should keep an eye on that.
Yeah, maybe talking about PII or PHI would be things you may not want to share, as opposed to, more like contact level data or surface level data around an account or a human.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think one of the things that's going to become common in the coming years is this concept of an AI provider. And if you watch the news, ChatGPT is the most well-known product. The company behind it is OpenAI. It now probably has 5 to 10 legit competitors out there. They all have their own privacy policies. They all have their own data retention policies. And so it's going to be important to know, and companies like ours are using those behind the scenes. So I think a question that should be asked as you're considering using OpenAI is who the AI provider behind the scenes is, so that you can understand their privacy policies, their data usage and retention policies. And that's going to become more and more common.
Yep, like anybody in the market, there's going to be a bunch of different flavors out there, and you're probably going to need to pick and choose which flavor you like and who you trust the most. Just like your FANG out there, your Facebooks, your Apples, your Netflix, your Googles, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also a question of the trade-off, right? I mean, how much are you willing to give in order to get more specialized response, right? The more you share, the better response you might get, but you are sharing data out. So there is some trade-off that you need to think of how much you're willing to trade off against the data. So anyway.
Yeah, and it's a risk reward scenario. If you believe the reward of leveraging this technology is vast, you might be able to stomach some more risk when it comes to giving up your own data. So I'll fly through a couple of these pretty quick so we can get to the last slide. So how will AI change my agency? It may reduce the number of people that we need for servicing, for basic responses, for giving people an ID card, for asking information about a policy, having that accessible and provide that to them. We'll increase our ability that customized personal experience that Jason mentioned earlier in the webinar. Our ability to do that at scale should ramp significantly. It should improve our loss ratio, our retention, our sales, again, by better understanding our customers, better communicating with them, and then giving agents and customer service reps the data that they need in real time to make decisions and provide better customer experience. If you are going to market, some of the tools around prospecting, some of the tools around, hey, this is the market that I should be chasing. This is how I should go after it, getting those immediately instead of having to stumble and fall for a couple of years on your own. Taking those larger models and giving us insights onto where we should go. I think another big one, the democratization of this technology allows us to play with the big boys. So, your mom and pop agency can go fight against Brown & Brown and fight the good fight in a better way that they could before. And then just the data that we have access to. Obviously, one of the most important and powerful pieces of our agency is the data that we own. If we can measure it, if we can manage it, we're going to be much more successful. So our final question here, should I be worried about AI? We were going through the slide together and I said, I think the short answer is no. And Jason was like, maybe yes. So guys, any thoughts here to close this out?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm in the camp where I think that this does need to be regulated to some extent. Like I think that eventually this will be treated kind of like nuclear weapons, where, especially with weapon systems, I hope and pray that all the governments around the world do not hook up AI to weapon systems. So there's even if you think about the impact on the economy, there's definitely impacts across the board. That said, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think the pros will outweigh the cons as long as we do this intelligently and don't do anything stupid. So yes, I would say you really need to worry about AI if you're not paying attention to it. The fact that everybody here is on a webinar learning about AI tells me that you're in the group that is going to be ahead of the curve. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. The people that think it's going to be a non-issue or it's not going to touch them, those are the people that need to be worried about it.
No, I 100% agree with that, and I'm more optimistic. I mean, again, on a slightly lighter note, if anybody's interested, there is actually a website called the Pessimist Archive, and it's fun to see, different pessimist views people have taken on technology over the last 50, 100 years, right? And it is they're all true articles there, so it's funny. So I think eventually we will know how to use it. It's new. It's sometimes scary because we don't know how it works. It feels not natural because we're not used to it. Once it becomes a part of life, I think everybody will accept it a little more easier or a little less scared about it. Like in any technology, if you use it in the wrong way, you're going to have negative outcomes. So use it wisely, use it for the right things. So there has to be things that you have to be careful about, things that might need regulation. But if you're using it to grow your business, if you're using it to keep your customers happier, if you're using it to understand your customers' behavior, like you're using it for all the right reasons to serve your customers better, there is no reason why you have to be worried about it. You can use it in a way that it's ethical, it's right, and everybody benefits from it. So I'm definitely a more optimist out of this, that eventually we kind of go past the worries and then look at the great potential. I think the potential far outweighs the risks if in general common sense prevails, and I think that is an assumption, but I think it eventually does. So
I would agree on the optimistic side, but maybe the answer to this question is based on the individual and your philosophy with humanity in general on how you feel it's going to be used and taken further. Which is a great way to wrap up the webinar. Last question from Rob. Knowing that ChatGPT scans the web and source for data, what about peer review ChatGPT? I think you're already seeing this implemented. If you go on Instagram and you go on Twitter today, you will see some fact-checking technology around that, where if somebody posts something, or if it's an imposter, you're seeing a lot of that on Twitter, where you've got fake senators posting and it's really hard to tell who's who. There is some of this fact-checking information, especially as you see this deep AI, where it can change somebody's voice, it can alter somebody's face and make them talk. To keep up with that is really important. So wonderful thoughts today. Anurag, Jason, thank you so much for your time. Really, really exciting stuff. And I'm sure there'll be more to come. So we've gone through quite a bit of Q&A. If you do have more, feel free to get in touch with any of us. You can find Jason and Anurag on LinkedIn. You can find their information on their websites as well, as far as what they're doing from an AI perspective. We will send out this recording today. I think it was requested that we send out the slides as well, so everybody will get this. And we really appreciate you all for joining. Anurag and Jason, any final thoughts as we exit today?
Future's going to be exciting. Onward and upward.
I fully agree. I think the future is exciting. We're just getting started. As far as we can, understand a little bit better of how to use it, people will be pleasantly surprised once they start using it.
100%. And again, to echo Jason's thought from earlier, if you're on this webinar, you're already ahead of the curve, trying to educate yourself and getting better every day. And thanks again, everybody, for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Take care, all.
Cheers, y'all. Take care.